Material Differences, Chapter 5, Part 1, No Witnesses. Jaeger briefly wondered about how the animals of the desert viewed him while he tread through their territory. Were they worried? Curious? Did they not care? Some of them were clearly startled by his appearance, or lack thereof, thanks to the way his cloak shifted to help him blend in with the night. It wasn't pitch black, though, so the more careful and observant creatures could see him as he walked past. Besides the light of the twin moons and the rings in the sky, there was some faint sign of Gullhaven in the distance out to his west. Nothing like the bright lights that used to dominate the coast before the war, but enough to break up the darkness. However, as he rounded one of the rainbow cliffs of the park, something else lit up the night ahead of him. The old quarry was thankfully in a state of disrepair. Perhaps a quarter of the original lights looked like they still worked. While that did pour out more bright light onto the area around the quarry than any normal lights could, it also left a maze of shadows across the ground that he could approach through if he was careful. Should he be careful, though? It was the middle of the night and he was dealing with scavs here, not like they were highly disciplined or advanced. It would be good practice, he realized, and pressed on careful now to keep himself in the shadows that the broken rocks cast upon the terrain leading up to the old structures. They hadn't even bothered to put up a wall. He could see that they'd made a scrap gate across the old road leading up, and there were makeshift rock bunkers dotting the approach. They must figure anyone coming for them would be too obvious to miss. Their mistake. The old structures at the center had clearly been added on, with the usual scav mentality of bolting metal sheets and frames together in the laziest manner possible to make passable walls. Out in the desert, it had to be cold inside without proper insulation, he figured. But as he switched over to thermal, he saw hot spots dotting the central building. Space heaters it looked like in the edge buildings, but only one looked like it had decent heating. It also seemed like the scavs must be awake because they were all clustered in a single room in the heated barracks. He slowly and carefully scanned the other buildings to make sure that none of the other warm spots he saw looked like people. No stragglers that he could see. But he did spot the generator, which was lit up hot and bright at the edge of the compound. Lazy, lazy, lazy. No Centaurs, and only one distant generator. He was almost disappointed this would be so easy. Not as good practice as he had hoped. Walking forward once more, he slipped between the skeletal remains of buses, cars, and trucks that surrounded the compound, likely brought here and scrapped to make their little fortress. He wondered if any of the old rock-crushing or finishing machinery in the outer buildings still worked. Used to be the rainbow rock they hear was pricey luxury stuff, though the gravel they made was useful too. If the scavs had any work ethic when they'd first found the place and worked the quarry instead, they'd likely have made far more money than they did as scavs, at least around here. Gullhaven was too well protected for them to harass the town proper, and the outlying farms, ranches, and other settlers were likely too poor to get much tribute from. But in the fall of society, it seemed like far too many people thought anarchy was their best bet. Why work hard to try and rebuild when they can just tear down, steal, and pillage? It wasn't even effective for most of the scavs, just the bosses. But maybe that was the point for them. All the scavs thought of themselves as the next boss. So of course they'd buy into a system where the boss was king and had all the loot, power, and luxury they could muster in the ruins of the old society. Because soon they'd be that person at the top of the pyramid. Idiots. It really wasn't sustainable. The pact had been slow to clear out scavs since they were still recovering and rebuilding, but in the end civilization would win. There would come a day when they finally swept the ruins clean of scavs, and what chance would barbarian rabble have against an industrialized military? None. History had proven that many times over. It's part of why Jaeger had never even considered turning the compound into the palace of his own scav kingdom. He might have lived like a king for a while. At best, he might have been so successful he could dominate the continent. But past that, it would either collapse upon itself through internal strife or from packed forces. Of course, Jaeger never had that sort of personality anyway. He was the loyal second in command, not the king of the scrap heap sort, or king of anywhere, really. Jaeger focused on his task at hand, however, once he reached the edge of the compound. Still careful to pick his way from shadow to shadow, he scurried around the edge of the compound, ever wary for sentries. They didn't even have dogs as far as he could tell. A mistake, to be sure. His armor and cloak could fool almost any bot or sensors, but one thing he couldn't fool was a dog's nose. Then again, he was glad they were so sloppy. Made his job easier. Much as he liked a challenge, he knew the easier the kill, the safer he was. These scavs would have been eaten alive by the scavs who fought over the old city south of the compound. Literally, filthy cannibals. But this close to the farms and ranches around Gullhaven, they must have access to meat from their tribute, because he didn't see any of the typical skeletal remains or blood paintings. When he got to the old generator room, he tapped the side and Spike scurried up his arm and through one of the broken windows to get inside. He just had to wait for the bot to open the locks and disable any traps. But much to his surprise, the door popped open immediately, and the bot scurried back around and up his body to sit on his shoulder again. It was unlocked and unguarded? Jaeger sighed and shook his head slowly as he stepped into the room to look the generator over. Right away, he could see that not one of the scavs was a proper engineer. The amount of duct tape and rope being used was not a good sign. Even as he stepped into the room, his suit quickly flashed warning to him of combustible fumes in the air, and the generator itself was noisy as hell. It looked like they'd taken some sort of combustion engine or engines and welded them together with a transformer from one of the old energy stations to make this makeshift and highly dangerous-looking generator. He could see a series of bent pipes that seemed to be feeding the whole engine with some kind of gas leading in from another building on the edge of the compound, closer to the edge of the quarry proper, but it also lead from the generator room back into the barracks. From what he could tell, they'd tapped into some sort of natural gas vein and fed the gas into their generator and a heater in the barracks, maybe? Oven, perhaps? But the pipes didn't look anything like something he'd want to use to pump natural gas. They were taped up all over and seemed to be a few different sizes, all forced to fit together. This whole thing was a bomb waiting for a spark. Best of all, he noticed a stick holding up a section of pipes next to some grease and oil cans that had a sign helpfully stuck to it. Don't touch. Jaeger simply kicked the stick and backed out of the room as the gas pipes connecting the generator to the main line broke away. He saw a valve slam shut then to seal most of the gas inside the main line as the generator quickly sputtered and died. At least they had a safety valve installed. Maybe this happened a lot? The lights outside flickered as the generator died and then went dark. Looking at the central barracks, he saw a door open and a lone figure came out as he heard faint complaints and angry barking from inside. Jaeger walked forward as the scav came towards him. The guy was muttering and slapping the back of a flashlight before it finally cast a pitifully dim little beam on the ground ahead of him. Lazy bastards. Always gotta send me. What do I know about generators? Last time I tell anyone I like engines. The scav muttered as he passed Jaeger, completely unaware of his presence in the dark, even though he stood less than a meter from where he passed. How did he want to do this? Cut his throat? Knife in the kidney? Snap his neck? Bullet to the back of the head? Bullet to the front of the head? He caught himself thinking about that a little too, eagerly, and held off, letting the guy walk past. Instead, he walked towards the barracks. He could hear the complaints and angry mutterings of the scavs inside as he got closer. They were moving around now, trying to search through cabinets and shelves for something. While they were distracted, he slipped through the door and drew his sidearm. Too close quarters for his rifle. He could see the scavs stumbling around in the dark, while his helmet gave him perfectly clear vision of what they were doing. They'd been clustered around a table with cards on it. Some had been drinking. To his surprise, in the corner was a makeshift guitar, bass, and drum set. Musical scavs? Who knew? Finally, one of them grabbed an oil lantern and held it up. Got it. Who has a light? I do, Jaeger said as he watched everyone in the room freeze at the sound of his crackling, enhanced voice broadcast through his helmet. Who said that? One asked, uselessly looking around in the dark. "A revenant," he announced and smiled. There were guns and weapons strewn all about the messy barracks, but not one scav had it with them since they were stumbling around looking for a way to light the place. As he announced himself, they began to dive for their guns, which was what he wanted. Some moving targets made it more interesting. He first fired on the one with the lantern. Standard revenant triple tap. 2 into the center of the face, 1 in the center of the chest. The back of the scav's head splattered itself against the shelf and wall behind him as he collapsed. The lantern smashed against the floor as he fell. Jaeger kept the gun tucked in close, letting his helmet track his aim as he went for the scav with the drumsticks in one hand and an old police-issue shotgun in the other. Another triple tap sent him sprawling back against the drums with a loud clang of the cymbals, far louder than Jaeger's suppressed sidearm. "He's by the door!" one of the scavs called out as Jaeger stepped further in. His muzzle flashes the only source of light in the room as he fired on the next scav. This one was desperately trying to find his revolver on the card table, but only managed to knock it off the side in his blind panic to find it in the dark. Jaeger quickly shot him twice in the head, and once in the chest as well, turning his body to the next as he kept his gun more or less locked with his center. This one was trying to run for the door on the far side of the barracks, but Jaeger had no issues shooting him twice in the back of the head as the scav's face suddenly decorated the door he was trying to escape through, his body slamming against it as it slid down to the floor. "Where is he?" one called out in terror as Jaeger kept stepping around the barracks, moving immediately after each triple tap momentarily lit up the barracks. This one had managed to get an old Fang SMG loaded and in his hands, but was facing the door where Jaeger was no longer standing. Without a clear shot into the center of his chest, Jaeger just resorted to shooting this one in the ear, which splashed the scav next to him in bits of brain and skull. His visor flashed to indicate a spent magazine, and he quickly ejected it before slamming in a new one in a well-practiced maneuver that was nearly robotic. "Jesus!" The gore-covered scav screamed out as he fumbled with trying to load a handgun in the dark, only for Jaeger to shoot him twice in the head for his troubles. But he was getting bored with simply shooting them now. They couldn't see him, so it wasn't a challenge at all. He wasn't even sure it qualified as target practice, since the bots on the range were far more difficult for him to hit when he trained. The next two were dispatched with similar ease as they fumbled about in the dark, but he was looking for the last when his suit gave him a proximity warning. Rolling forward, Jaeger looked back to see a scav swing a cleaver through the air where he'd been standing. His armor would have stopped the strike easily enough, but that didn't mean he had any intention of getting smacked in the head. Tucking his sidearm back into his holster, he began to dance around the last of the scavs, figuring he'd draw this one out a bit. "Show yourself, coward!" This scav was a bigger one. Just shy of 2 meters tall, he was bald, yet sporting a very large bushy beard. Scars crisscrossed his face and forearms, and Jaeger imagined under his makeshift scrap metal armor there would be still more signs of many battles fought over his life. Maybe a career criminal before the war. Or hell, maybe he had been a mild-mannered schoolteacher who went berserk. Jaeger didn't know, and he didn't care. Stepping forward, he grabbed the scav's right wrist and then punched his elbow, snapping the bone with a loud crack as the scav began to scream. As the scav dropped the cleaver reflexively, Jaeger grabbed it and with a swift swing brought it down hard into the scav's skull. There was another cracking sound as the blade split the bone and was left buried halfway through his head. Considering how strong the suit made him, it was suicide for any normal person to try and fight him in hand-to-hand. But he gave the scav credit for trying. Perhaps some tiny bit of his brain was still alive as the scav tried to say something, but it came out as a splutter of nonsense and blood before the body collapsed. The cleaver was stuck into his skull so tight the handle propped the scav's head up at an unnatural angle while the body was sprawled out on the floor. The lights flickered back to life then, and Jaeger looked around in regular lighting at the carnage and blood all around him. He took a few steps out of the kitchen to face the door then, drawing his sidearm. His suit was tracking how many bullets he had left in the magazine. 3 more for this magazine. More than enough.